Welcome to this chapter of the St. Andrew Society of Detroit's Oral History Project. This project was the undertaking of the Charles S. Lowe Memorial Library Committee to capture members' recollections of the society. Recorded in January of 2018, these are the recollections of Ian Hunter, past chair of the Board of Trustees, past chair of the Investment Committee, and past chair of the Highland Games.
I guess from the beginning, I'll briefly discuss how I ended up being in the St. Andrew Society and what happened when that occurred. I'd been a guest at a Robert Burns dinner at the Hall sometime in the probably early 80s, mid-80s, and I was a guest of a gentleman who was a member. And we discussed what I'd have to do to join the St. Andrew Society, and to some degree he appeared to emphasize, well, you have to establish your Scottish background. So I spent a lot of time dwelling on, well, how to do that. And in my case, my father was a Scot, and my mother was not, and then my family really had no historian, so it was difficult to isolate how I could establish I was a descendant of a Scot, thinking that was of great importance. I've since discovered that it is not necessary to prove with exactness your Scottish background. It's almost, if you're a Scottish wannabe, you have some possibility of joining the St. Andrew Society. However, in that case, I was unaware of that, so I kept delaying. My wife, unbeknownst to me, took it upon herself to investigate how I could join, and she got a hold of William Hunter Kincaid, who was a member of the society, and it was an officer and ultimately became the president, and he was living in Ann Arbor, and she got a hold of him, and he explained what went on and how you had to secure your membership. So she gathered the material and filled out the application and sent it in, and was advised, she was advised, not me, that I would be initiated at a certain meeting. In advance of the initiation, my wife and I went to dinner and she ended up inviting some people that I didn't know about, but we showed up at the restaurant, and lo and behold, there were 6 to 8 people at the dinner. About midway through the event, there was a little disturbance out by the doorway, and in piped a piper. It happened to be Matt Turnbull, who was the son of one of our members, Mrs. Turnbull, who was a member prior to the women becoming members. She was a member of the auxiliary of the St. Andrew Society, which I don't know everyone knows a lot about, but we had a women's organization that was composed of members' wives or daughters, but they were, of course, not allowed to be a member of the St. Andrew Society until Flo Stahl became the first member in the late 80s, I believe. But anyway, at that time, the piper arrived and he delivered me this folder, and in the folder was an announcement that I had been acknowledged to be admitted in the St. Andrew Society, and I'd have to be at the installation it was either in April or May of 1990, as well as my wife had clandestinely used my Northwest points to arrange for a trip to Scotland that would begin on my birthday, June 15th. So anyway, that's how I discovered that I was going to be a member of the St. Andrews Society, and I arrived at the installation at the St. Andrews Hall in downtown Detroit, and I think there were 8 or 9 of us being initiated that night. That time you didn't initiate every meeting, you initiated twice a year, I believe. And so there were 2 other hunters, Matt and Anna Hunter, and myself. So we were the largest contingent of that particular class. But anyway, that night I was installed. William Phoenix was the president, and he was in charge of the installation. So that's when I became a member of the St. Andrew Society. And on the morning of June 15th, the following month, or the 2 months, I arrived for the first time in Scotland at the Glasgow airport to spend about a week in Scotland and then thereafter London. So that's how it started. That's how I became a member. And I have since discovered that I didn't need to delay quite so long to prove my credentials because they're legitimate. They just aren't elaborately established.
Maybe describe St. Andrew Hall and then describe how people are sworn in here at the Kilgore Center.
Well, as I recall, at that time you didn't install people month by month, which is nothing wrong with that, but it was a more tradition. You'd gather your new members, I think, twice a year and have a more extensive installation at that time. And so the hall was a multi-storied facility, and the installation, as I recall, took place in the room in the second floor. And it was one of the traditions then, you couldn't enter the meeting room until you gave the password, unless you were being escorted by a member. So from then on, you had to remember the password, which was chosen by the president of the organization each year to allow you access to the facility. Now, at this time, the St. Andrew Society Hall had been leased to another organization that conducted rock concerts, which is even today, presently, its use. It was a gentleman by the name of Blair McGowan. He may have some partners, but they had leased the building a few years before I joined, and one of the conditions of the lease is the St. Andrew Society could only gain access to its hall a certain number of days a year, their meeting date, and maybe a couple of others. But other than that, we were prohibited from entry because it was being used as a commercial establishment and they were conducting their business. So that was a thing I discovered when I was there. Now, 2 years after I joined, by that time I think I was on the board of trustees, it became increasingly evident that the society could not afford to maintain this building. It's old, it needed constant maintenance, and it was just expensive beyond its capacity. There was a decline in membership willingness to go downtown Detroit. This was in the 90s after the fracas in Detroit, and so a lot of the members were hesitant to go downtown, so that's one of the reasons they actually leased the facility just to be able to maintain it. So a judgment was made that we'd reached the point of no return, so the society elected to attempt to sell the building. And so we advertised it, and ultimately we got one bid. That was the tenant. We had no other interest. But he did offer to buy it for a price that was not unfair, but it was not as much as you'd certainly get for the building today under the certain circumstances. So we sold it, cleaned out some of the artifacts that were unique, of historic significance. The sign out in front of the window, the mural, or whatever it is, was taken from the society's building. In addition, the infamous Robert Burns painting by Robert Hopkin was removed.
Could you describe that painting a little bit?
Well, yes, in part because in recent history we have gone to great extents to try to restore it. So I've discovered quite a bit about it in the process of that restoration effort. It's extremely large painting, probably the largest painting of Robert Burns, and it's not a portrait of Robert Burns. It is a reflection of the artist Robert Hopkins' perception of him, and it has symbols of Robert Burns. It has the bridge in Alloway, and it has various aspects. It's about 6 feet by 7 feet. It's a huge painting. And over time, sitting in the St. Andrews Hall, subject to the environmental problems of smoking and moisture and all that, it was a mess, and it had become smudged, and therefore you could barely see the image of Robert Burns behind all of the painting and the other aspects of it. So it was in ruinous condition when we took it out. There had been some efforts to self-restore it, but they had some. In fact, even people had cut into it. Somehow, pieces of it were detached from the thing. But it remained in the custody of the St. Andrew Society until about, and it still is. But I think it was about 6 years ago or so we began a more substantial effort to restore it. We formed a committee composed of some of our blue ribbon people, John Cherry, Randall Kane, various other people, to try to solicit money to afford it. And the first efforts failed somewhat. We formulated a brochure. We had contact with a man who claimed he could restore it, but we just were not getting enough financial support to continue it. And so it sort of stopped. Well, more recently, about 4 years ago, we resurrected it. Did in fact contract with a young lady to do the restoration, one of the art restorers of the Detroit area, and then we approached the society and asked for their commitment to afford it. And unfortunately, it was voted down, so we didn't forego the effort, but we continued in the absence of any financial support. Well, more recently, fortunately, because of one of our members, Chuck Forbes, who is the owner of the Gem Theater, in fact, for whom Steve Nesbitt worked for Chuck Forbes for a number of years as a sort of an official down at the Gem Theater. But anyway, he's Scottish. He'd gone to the Old Hall many times and witnessed Robert Burns' painting. So he has been the savior of the financial part of the restoration of Robert Burns' painting. He's retained, as part of his commercial efforts, a man from Belarus who is an accomplished art restorer. And he's helping to restore the Gem Theater, and he's restoring now the Colony Club, which Mr. Forbes also owns. And he's very competent in this area, so he volunteered his art restorer to assist us, and has in fact since contributed additional monies to the society for this project. And he did ask for a certain amount to assist him in paying his art restorer. And we were able to secure that contract. We now have a commitment from the Society's Board of Trustees that they'll make up what difference we might need to finish it off. We were up over $20,000 by the time we finally got around to this, and we're almost to the $25,000 that we needed to finish it. And we were hoping to have it this month, but it looks like it will be done this year. And I understand, I haven't seen it, but Ann Campbell and Bob Giles have been down there a couple of times recently, and they say that you can actually see Robert Burns now. I mean, he's reaching the point where it's going to be visible. Now, next problem will be when it's finished is where do you put it? It's a huge painting, and apparently it's only going to fit in the main room, because even the Burns room is not big enough to contain it. So anyway, that's one of my memories of my days in the society, and it hopefully will reach fruition soon. Probably the most significant event that occurred after I joined and became a member of the Board of Trustees was the sale of the building. Bill Phoenix was president, and I was principal spokesman to negotiate that sale. And that altered the nature of society substantially, because we were now nomads. We had no meeting place, and therefore we had to secure rooms or places to conduct our membership meetings. We ended up using many, but ultimately we were using the Commonwealth Club more often than others, and they allowed us to meet at their facility on DeQuinder in Madison Heights, I think, or Warren, whatever it is. And that became our location. But at the same time, we realized that we needed a space to put our records and all that, so we did lease an office in Southfield, which became the center of the Society's business activity. We would conduct our executive committee meetings and our board meetings there and other events and maintain our records. And that was in Southfield on Southfield Road. And we leased that for a number of years, and until the Kilgore Center was purchased. Another event, when we received the funds from the sale of the building, we recognized that our financial assets were extremely limited up to that point, at least in my time. and therefore there wasn't many funds to invest or secure, which is it was like month to month to get through the pay. But with that, it was a reasonable amount of money that required some more professional approach. Well, fortunately for us, we had Bert Middlemas. Middlemas was the treasurer of the society for many years, and he had been involved in banking or financial circles, and therefore was well equipped to at least prod us along. And then shortly after that, Malcolm Milne joined the association, and he had been a vice president in charge of the bond portfolio at a banking institution. I think it was Standard Federal, downtown Detroit. I could be wrong on the name. And he joined, and then he volunteered to assist us. So with Bert Middlemas and Matthew Milne, we were able to put a little more professional touch. He invested in various bonds and they were like ladders where they were expiring at different times. It was very professionally done, and therefore we were able to basically increase the portfolio with his assistance. And that went on for a number of years. And the next thing that impacted the society's finances was, out of nowhere, 8-9 years ago, we were advised that we were a residuary beneficiary of a trust that was formulated by the Kilgores. And we'd had rumor of this in advance. The Kilgores lived in, I think, Bloomfield or Birmingham, and he had been a member. I don't think any of us had ever met him, but he had been a member. And his wife, I think they were both Scots, and rumor had it that they were going to submit a large bequest to the society. Rumor. Nothing materialized. We get a note or two from one or the other, but nothing happened. All of a sudden, we discovered that Mrs. Kilgore, he died, and Mrs. Kilgore was placed under a conservatorship and guardianship in Oakland County Circuit Court by her child, because she was reaching a point she really couldn't take care of herself. But that's all we knew. About 2 years or so after that, we were advised by the personal representative of the trust that he discovered that the Kilgore daughter had filed a matter in the Tuscola County Probate Court contending that there had been no will. It was in probate the estate because it was intestate or without a will or a trust. And he just learned of that, so he was going up to Cairo, Michigan, where the probate court is in Tuscola County, to protest the effort by the daughter to act like there wasn't a will. It turned out there was a will or a trust that provided a number of beneficiaries, but including the St. Andrew Society as the residuary. So once the estate had paid these other individual bequests, the society would get the balance. But in exchange for that, the society had to construct a hall. Well, and therefore we joined with the representative of the estate to protest the daughter's efforts to avoid probate and keep it all for the family. And after a number of hearings, we succeeded. But it's interesting that the judge's name, William Wallace, and interesting also that his predecessor in Tuscola County Probate Court, through another matter that I discovered, his name was Bates Wills. So these probate judges in Tuscola County had somewhat unusual names. One's named Bates Wills, so that's what he's dealing with, his wills. And then we have a Scottish claim being judged by William Wallace. William Wallace something, but he was definitely Scottish.
Through this will, you had the funds then to build a building.
Yes, we had to correct that, because to build a building would involve a lot more expenditures than buying a building. But once we were able to establish the validity of the estate plan and become the residuary beneficiary, and that was finalized, then we went to the court and asked, could we buy a building and use it as a hall, and we were given that authority. Now, the next problem with those events is that the estate of the Kilgores was under the auspices of the Northern Trust, and it was responsible for the investment and administration of these funds. given the circumstances, say the trust was millions, but their bequests to the community house, the various other organizations given a specific cash distribution. And when it was all said and done, when those were all complied with, then we got the difference. We at St. Andrews Society at the time was a 501c4 organization when this all started, not C3. So under the Internal Revenue Code, contributions to a 501c4 are not deductible as charitable deductions. Now, they're nonprofit organizations, so they don't pay income taxes, but you and I could not give money to them and then deduct it from our taxes. Well, 501c3 is a nonprofit, but it's a charitable or educational foundation which contributions are deductible from the donor. So we were caught in a crisis of sorts because we're a 501c4 and not a 501c3 at the time. So we began the process of trying to convert to a 501c3, which, by the way, it was something we tried long before the Kilgore saga and had been rejected by the membership on one or two occasions because they kept saying they don't want the government involved in our society. Well, the reality is a 501c4 is already a governmentally established thing. But anyway, we failed on two different efforts to persuade well, when this happened, when the Kilgore thing and the importance of being a 501c3 became more pronounced, during this period of time, we weren't a 501c3, we were a 501c4, but we were able to persuade the Internal Revenue Service that we're still a charitable organization. We're still a nonprofit. Over time, we have been a benevolent, or we've been making benevolences to people, initially a lot of Scottish immigrants, and thereafter more universal. And we were able to persuade the Internal Revenue Service that we should be treated as a charitable contribution, and therefore our amount would not be subject to the estate tax. Otherwise, we would have had to pay, and our bequests would have been reduced by the amount of the tax on all of the contributions. But fortunately, we were able to work that out, and then about the same time, the Internal Revenue Service approved our conversion to a 501c3, and that cemented that tax problem. And it also allows us now not to pay a property tax. If we had not been a 501c3, we'd be paying the city of Troy and Oakland County substantial funds in property taxes, but because we are a charitable organization, we don't have to. So those are exciting moments, and lots of tension, but John Thompson, my fellow member and another attorney who is involved more in these things than I am, we were able to get these done. Now, concurrent with that, we were advising the Northern Trust representatives of this situation, and we asked them to treat us, when they were filing their return with the Internal Revenue Service as the personal representative of the estate, to treat our bequest as charitable, and therefore treated as not being subject to the tax. But they wouldn't do it. They went ahead and filed the return and treated us as a non-charitable organization. And we went in there and we lobbied them and lobbied them and lobbied them, and they refused to change. So we had to hire an attorney to go to the Internal Revenue Service, independent of our personal representative, and it was a gentleman, Howard Grix, I think, a very distinguished state attorney for Dickinson Wright, and he was able to shepherd the thing through the Internal Revenue Service. The Internal Revenue Service did find that we were 501c, and concurrently it treated us as a charitable organizations for purposes of the taxation. So we escaped with a lot of more money than we would have had otherwise.
And that just gave you that much more money as a society and much greater options to be able to work as a...
That's right. Now, we would have still had plenty, but it wasn't as much, and therefore it was most important that it happened that way. That was all leading up to the fact that I was telling you, when we formed the investment committee, we did it with, $200,000-$300,000 at most from the sale of the building. But when we got literally almost $3 million in the Kilgore incident, then we had to make the investment policy more formal, and we hired a professional investment advisor, Seizert Capital Partners, as our first formal investment advisor, and they became responsible for the administration of the funds. And from then on, the investment committee was meeting quarterly with their representatives to monitor, and then we developed a policy that was recommended by professionals to guide them in the efforts to invest the funds most effectively.
Yeah, St. Andrew's Society seems to have a large number of benefactors. Originally, the charitable donations from the society were given to Scots coming over here to the Metro Detroit area, but now it's grown much broader.
The problem is immigration has dwindled to very few Scots are coming over there. There's not many of them needing help when they get here. But when it was first formed in the 19th century, immigration was extensive, and that's how they'd immigrate from Scotland, and if they had a family member in the Detroit area, they'd come to Detroit, because they had some relatives to convert, and they needed help. That's what it was really formed for in it was 1847 or whatever it is. And but since then, that pattern, well, it continued into the 20th century, but has dwindled. By the time I joined, we weren't getting many Scottish immigrants arriving in Detroit. They'd rather stay in Scotland, I think, at that time. It has since developed. Alma College, of course, is a Scottish institution of learning. Therefore, we have historically made one of our major contributions to them. The McFarland and Company group is a more recent donee, but it does great things for us. And I get a kick out of the fact that Elliot McFarland, the founder and leader of that, is hired by the Scottish government to teach Scots Scottish history. I mean, that's, I think, quite a reversal of roles. But anyway, that's one of those. And we've continued to make contributions to the Benevolence Committee, reviews somewhat extensively the possibilities, and each year annually selects organizations for contributions. And we've been doing it consecutively, even in the midst of underfunding, but more recently we have been a little more flexible in our ability to make contributions. We are probably one of the more financially stable ethnic organizations in the Detroit area, but if we don't handle our monies properly, we won't be. So that's what the investment committee is responsible for.
Ian, can you shed a little light on perhaps some of the other contemporary charities that the society donates money to?
Well, we've selected Walsh College down the street as one because it's in Troy, and they have given us some assistance. Since I've been involved, we actually reached out and identified a small number of Scottish organizations that we felt deserving of some contributions. We don't give them a lot of money, but Erskine Hospital, I think it is one that we've been giving to for a number of years. It's a medical facility in Scotland that we give $500 or something, and we've communicated with them, and on a couple of occasions they've delivered, somebody from the society has delivered the check to the location in Scotland. We've made contributions to a couple of institutions that have been trying to preserve the Gaelic language. Those are examples of our more diverse selection of organizations. Of course, we do the Salvation Army, we do various local, that's not local, but it's for local impact. And again, it's reviewed annually by the Benevolence Committee and continues.
What do you enjoy about being a member and participating in the St. Andrew's Society of Detroit?
Well, being Scottish, significantly Scottish, and I've emphasized that more to my English and German half of that comes from my mother. It's been very interesting. It's been very rewarding to develop a better understanding of my ancestral roots, of Scottish history, of the Scots' contributions to society. And as you know, the Scots invented the modern world. I'm sure you've read that book. So you know to the great extent that we take pride in our contributions, of which I gave none, but nonetheless. I've enjoyed participating actively in their affairs. I enjoy going to Robert Burns dinners, having been to about 24 of them. I may have reached the saturation point, but I'll probably go to a couple more anyway. And it's been fun, it's been educational, it's been exciting, it's been rewarding.
Ian, tell me about one of the funniest things that ever happened at a meeting.
There were many things that have happened, but one incident I do recall that was particularly entertaining was one meeting over in the Commonwealth Club. It was after the games. There was Tom Plunkett was his name. He was a Scot and also a devotee of the Glasgow Rangers. I remember that. But beyond that, he recognized that Scotland at that time and for many years was part of the United Kingdom. It was part of Great Britain. And so he mentioned at a meeting that he wondered why we weren't flying the Union Jack at the games, because Scotland is part of the United Kingdom. Well, Tommy McLaughlin and a few others took great offense, and we went through about an hour heated debate as whether or not the St. Andrews Society would fly the Union Jack at its games.
To this day, does the society fly the Union Jack?
No, and I don't think it is yet.
Speaking of fun, I'm sure you've developed a great camaraderie with a great number of members. Detail that a little bit.
Oh, yes, that's one advantage of an organization like this. Beyond the work, the efforts, it's the convening with people who share many things. Unfortunately, I just went to a memorial for William Phoenix, who was the president when I joined, and with whom I developed a substantial friendship. And for 25 years, we were convening, in addition to our meetings, for lunch and dinners and social events. The man was an educator, and he was a prolific reader. He got a doctorate in military history and taught at Highland Park Junior College and Windsor University. In fact, he got his Ph.D. at Michigan. Bob Giles, former newsman who's active yet in the organization. We meet with him and his wife frequently. George Boyd, of course, the master of the games. Scott David, former president. Ron Cunningham. Of course, Ann Campbell is I view her as the angel of the society, the most dedicated, industrious member I think we've ever had. And just goes on and on. Needless to say, one of the distinct pleasures of the society is convening with the members and enjoying small talk, big talk, so on and so forth.
Ian, you seem to be very involved in the club and have enjoyed being so for many, many years. What would you tell younger people today, millennials, people that are in their middle, late 20s, early 30s, maybe people that have young families that they might remember grandma saying something that, I got a drop of Scottish blood. Why should they take a look at the St. Andrews Society of Detroit? Why should they become involved, and what's in it for them?
To the degree they view themselves as Scots, at least ancestrally, they owe it to themselves to join an organization like ours in order to enhance their knowledge, enhance their understanding, to be more fully acquainted with their Scottish background and culture, and enjoyment of being a Scot.
This presentation of the St. Andrews Society of Detroit's Oral History Project was produced by Van Rohr for the St. Andrews Society of Detroit's Library Committee under the direction of Dennis Clements, current chairperson, and Shelby Brown Rohr, current St. Andrews Society of Detroit's communication director. This project celebrates the 169th year of the St. Andrews Society of Detroit. Salante.